Let's talk about how to introduce autistic children to horses in a way that is safe and pleasant for them. What I see a lot of parents and families and practitioners doing is either rushing the kid into the experience or not considering some of the sensitivities that autistic children have, and then it just creates kind of a disaster. I'm going to share a handful of tips to avoid that and also to make it a safe and pleasant experience. Hi, my name is Katie, and I have my horse program Alma Vita Horse Ranch out here in Arizona. I've been working with autistic children for most of my life. Tip number one is to recognize that each child has their own unique individual needs. And I know this might sound like a really basic no-brainer tip, but you'd actually be surprised by how many people create expectations for these kids, and then that kind of sets them up for failure. So you've probably heard before that autism is on a spectrum. What works for one child might be a complete disaster for another child. And so this is where discernment comes in. One modality or technique that works for one child may or may not work for the next child. All right, tip number two is all about sensory integration. This is where I see a lot of people go wrong. So listen, autistic children do not experience the world like a neurotypical person does. They can be easily overwhelmed by noises, by smells, by new experiences, all sorts of things like that that you might not consider. So for example, when they come onto the horse farm, the smell of manure, the touch of fur, having fur or dirt on their hands or their feet, water, any of these types of things can really trigger an autistic child, and it can make it a really difficult experience for them. So my tip here is to take it slow. Reduce your expectations and take it slow. So for example, in real life, this would look like possibly having a 30-minute session instead of a 60-minute session. That's something I offer at my horse ranch out here in Arizona. Is I do offer 30-minute sessions for kids that are either younger and they have a shorter attention span, or they don't have to be younger. Maybe they're just overwhelmed by horses and the farm experience, and they need that shorter session at first to be able to learn how to integrate this whole experience into their life. Look, Tater Tot's joining us. He's so cool. He's one of our great therapy horses, and you either love him or hate him. He's very polarizing in that way. I'm going to share a video real quick about one of my clients who overcame some of his sensory difficulties and had a really triumphant moment because of it. So I'm going to show the video here. I want to share a quick story about a young boy I worked with. He was about 12 years old and he loved horses, but he had some sensory difficulties, as in he was very disgusted by smells and the textures that come with being around horses. I worked with him for several months one-on-one, just once a week, and at the end of every session he really badly wanted to feed a horse a peppermint. So every week I would have him either just watch me do it, or he would put his hand under my hand and he would help me give the horse a peppermint that way. I never told him he had to do it a certain way or anything like that. One week he came to me and he said, "I'm ready to feed a horse a peppermint." And so I put the peppermint in his hand and he handed it over to the horse, who then ate the peppermint. And he giggled, he jumped up and down. He was so proud of himself for feeding that horse a peppermint. And I was really proud of him too, for being able to integrate these difficult experiences and have a moment of joy at the end of the day. The next tip is creating a calm and safe environment. This is so huge. So the first part of this is reducing outside noise if possible. Now listen, I understand what it's like to be on a horse farm. You can't always control some of the outside noise, especially if you're like me and you have neighbors who, I'm surrounded by farmers, so there's tractors, there's yard work, there's people coming by on big box trucks and things like that. Also, I live next to an airport. So when I have jets and military aircraft flying over, that's not exactly something I can control. But I'll give you a real life example of this. I had a client who, she had a really difficult time with auditory input. And so she was coming to me in the middle of the week, and my neighbors just happened to schedule their landscapers weekly for that time slot. And so this made it a really difficult experience for her. She had a really hard time, staying present, being with the horses because there were like leaf blowers and weed eaters and all these sorts of things. So what we did is we actually moved her session time to a different time without being distracted by all of this yard work. So you might be thinking, Katie, why didn't you get to a point where she could tolerate that experience and integrate all of that yard work and noise and chaos into her life? And so that brings me back to my first point, that everyone is their own unique individual, and what works for one child might not work for another. So what was the best choice for this kid, moving her session time? That might not be the best choice for another kid that you're working. This is where it's good to, be able to understand each child's unique individual needs and make a wise professional choice on what the next best step is. Another point within creating a calm and safe environment, positive reinforcement. So find out what these children love to do. Do they like games? Do they like toys or food? Do they like collecting sticks and rocks? A really common one with the kids that I work with is they really like feeding and chasing the chickens around, because we have a whole bunch of chickens out here as well. And using positive reward would look like saying, if you participate with the horse and you engage with the horse for X amount of time, then we'll spend the last 10 or 15 minutes of the session. It gives the kids something to look forward to, especially if they get a little bit distracted with the horses. Maybe they're not that engaged at first. That gives them some motivation to do their best with the horses, and then they'll be rewarded at the end. So it doesn't have to be chickens. If they like collecting sticks or rocks, then you can even integrate that within the session. You could say something like, okay, well, if we spend 10 minutes, brushing and grooming the horse, then we can spend 5 minutes collecting sticks and rocks. You can kind of play around with that and see what works for the kid that you're working with. My last point within creating a calm and safe environment is horse selection. Okay, so this comes with time and experience. I've personally been working with my herd out here for close to 2 years, and I live with them. I see them every single day of my life, gotten to know them very, very well. Tater? Especially this dude, Tater Tot. He's actually a mule. So going into wise horse selection, not every single horse is a great therapy horse, and not every single horse is great for every single kid. I'll use Tater Tot as an example here. He's pretty quirky. He has a big personality. He's not always easy to work with, and especially if you're new to being around horses or mules, he can just be quiet and be a brute. I don't know how else to describe him. If you know him, you'd probably agree with me. He's just very headstrong and opinionated and all these things. And so, for example, if I get a client who's extremely meek and timid and, afraid to pick up the rope and, doesn't want to apply pressure and these types of things, that's not necessarily a bad thing at all, but they'd probably not be the best fit for this big, strong, beefy mule. As someone who runs my own equine program, this is where experience and horse knowledge comes into play. If you didn't already know, I'm a certified equine specialist through EGALA, and what that just means is I've spent so many hours getting to study equine behavior. My role as a professional is to make a wise horse selection for the children, and then also just keep everyone safe. And if I do say so myself, I've done a great job of that, and it really helps to have a whole herd of horses that I can trust. My next point is be prepared to change your plan. This can apply to anyone who works with horses, but when you add horses and children on the spectrum or autistic children, you have to be prepared to change your plan. You might think of a whole lesson program and structured thing, and then you get out here and it just does not work, because either the kid's having a bad day, your horses could even be having a bad day. There's just so many factors that go into, every single day on the horse farm is different. So you just have to be prepared for that. I don't know if you guys do this, but for some of my clients, when they're here for the last few minutes of the session, we plan what we'll be doing the next week. And that's great. But sometimes they come here the next week and they've had a terrible day, and they don't want to do what we planned last week. And like I said, case by case, child by child, you got to discern if this is a wise choice or not. But oftentimes it is a wise choice to say, you know what, we're going to forget the plans that we made and we're going to take it easy. We're going to find a horse to work with, and we'll go slow with them and, have a good time. Now, on the flip side, some children who are neurodivergent or on the spectrum do really, really well with structure and routine. So if you can create a routine for these kids, that's how they respond best. And that's how they feel a sense of safety and predictability. They get to the farm and they know what's going to happen. Like I keep emphasizing, each kid is different, so you'll have to get to know each kid and just make the best choice for each individual kid. That brings me to my next tip, which is open communication between parents and practitioners. All right, so this is one that I see overlooked all the time, and I don't get it because it's literally so easy to do a check-in. If you're a parent, you can check in with the equine professional. If you're an equine professional, you can do a check-in with the parent. So what this looks like, oh look, Tater Tot has some drawings on him. So what this looks like is either before or after the session, or both, going up to the parents and saying, hey, how's it going? Are there any behaviors or triggers I need to know about? What do you want us working towards? Just asking these sorts of questions. Now, the way that I run my program is I have people come out for a farm tour before they start working with me. And that's usually where I can talk in depth with the parents about what they're looking for in an equine program, what they're hoping to achieve, what they want for their kid, all these sorts of things. But as time goes on, once their kid starts coming out to the horse sessions and we get going and they come week after week, it's still important to check in with the parents. How are they before and after the session? All these sorts of things. And this is where it can be really rewarding too. If you're bringing kids around horses and you hear like they talk about this all week, it's the highlight of their week. That's just so amazing to be able to provide that for a kid. Also, open communication is so important because there's some big thing that this kid can't stand. For example, if, there's a kid coming to me who has a severe aversion to feeling water on his hands and it sends him into a frenzy, we're not going to give the horse a shower. This is where you can talk to the parents, or parents, you can talk to an equine professional like me and get some of these big things out of the way before getting started. That way we can all be set up for success. All right, my last and final tip is addressing safety concerns. This is probably the one that you've all been waiting for. I've seen a lot of farms do it differently, and what I personally do as far as safety goes, before the kids come out, I like to address any type of big behaviors. Is this kid prone to bolting, just like a horse might be? Do they kick? Do they bite? Do they scream? It's really important to know about that before the session. And I personally don't work with kids who have behaviors that would become dangerous to me or the horse. Now, when the kid's actually in the session, I have some safety protocols in place. Of course, I teach all the basics for the kids, like don't walk under the horse. I personally don't allow my kids to pick out the horse's hooves. I've just seen it gone wrong too many times in the past to be comfortable teaching it. So that's one thing that I do skip. Now, not everyone agrees with me. I've even heard of some programs where picking up the hooves and picking out the feet is like a huge part of what they teach. And so if you're a parent looking for an equine program, these are questions that you can ask the practitioner and see what works best for you and your kid. I personally found that picking out the horse feet just does not work for me and my program. As far as walking behind the horse, everyone has a different opinion about that. What I tell everybody and the kids is that my horses most likely won't kick, but I will never guarantee that they won't kick. When they walk behind the horse, I just have them put a hand on the horse and talk to them, or they can take a huge amount of space and walk behind them. I always say enough room for at least 2 elephants. I think that's like a funny description that most kids like to listen to. And most kids do give the horse like an absurd amount of space, which is fine because then they won't get kicked. And then as far as other safety concerns, like if the kid were to run away or something like that, you just want to stay close. You want to stay within arm's reach of the kid. Always keep an eye on them. Just do things like that to make sure that it's a safe environment for everyone. One last point on the safety protocol, and this one's kind of funny and it kind of surprises a lot of people, but I'm not shocked by it anymore. But a lot of kids, when they first start working with the horses, they will just drop the lead rope and walk away from the horse. And so you have to constantly remind them like, hey, we're working with a horse. You can't just leave them there, right? And this is actually a great exercise for kids who might have like a really low attention span or they tend to get easily distracted. I've found that teaching the kids to hold on to the rope with both hands and be really mindful that there's a horse on the other side of that rope is a really good exercise. I could go on and on and on about horse safety, but I think those are the big major points that you're probably curious about. Hopefully, if you are an equine practitioner wanting to work with autistic children, or you're a parent who has an autistic child yourself, I hope this was a helpful video for you, and I hope that you learned a few things, and that if you're curious about putting your kid into an equine program, this gave you some insight into what that might look like at first. If you want to receive exclusive behind the scenes content and deals from me, sign up for my email list. Listen, I hate spam just as much as you do, so I'm not going to spam you, but only my email subscribers get these deals and get these behind the scenes looks at the farm and everything going on here. So if you're interested, you'll definitely want to sign up. I have a link in my description. If you're interested in my equine program, I have very limited availability, so go ahead and send me an email. My email is in the description as well. I would love to chat with you about what it might look like to get your kids started with working with the horses. And as always, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys next Friday. Bye.